very much for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to be among colleagues, teachers of English from many different places in the world. Before I get started, let me just very quickly mention about my university. This is the name of my university, Nanyang Technological University. It's located in Singapore. If you happen to be in Singapore, please make sure that you drop me a line so that I can take you to a campus tour, free of charge, completely free, plus lunch thrown in as well. Lunch at the NI canteen is on me, but if you want something more fancy than that, we can, but you have to pay for that, not us, not me. I belong to the Faculty of Education, or in some other places it's called School of Education, and locally it's known as the National Institute of Education, the only teacher training education in Singapore. And that's why I call this the best teacher education institution in Singapore. There's only one. If you want to become a teacher in Singapore, you have to go to the School of Education, and you have to study with me and also with Donna and with some other faculty members there. Today's session, very straightforward. I will start off by sharing with you some of the most important principles for language teaching, in particular for teaching young children, in particular for teaching young learners. After that, Donna, my colleague, who has had a lot of experience teaching young children in school, and also now she's doing, pre-service training also at my university, and she will be sharing with you what actually happens in the primary school classroom in Singapore. So how teachers in Singapore actually do the teaching of English in the classroom. Okay, now here are 5 things that I want to share with you, 5 principles that I think are so important, whether you teach young children or whether you teach older children. I think you can't run away from these 5 principles. The first one is the principle that says that you need to make sure that when students learn English, they need to see the language every day. They need to hear the language every day. They need to have sufficient quantity being exposed to them. You need to immerse your students in meaningful, interesting language on a daily basis. I think that one is very straightforward, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit more about that in the next slides. The next one is the importance of engaged learning. I think we all know that teaching and learning are 2 different things. In the classroom, when we present a lesson, it doesn't mean that the students are always, in a position to learn things that we share with them. So our main job as a teacher is making sure that the students are fully engaged. They are paying attention, they're emotionally engaged, they are cognitively engaged, and things like that. The next principle is something that you have heard again and again, the importance of providing meaningful practice to your students. The next bit is on fluency development, and I'll explain later why fluency is such an important concept in teaching language to young learners or to older learners. And the last one is about culture and how culture can be incorporated, can be infused in our teaching on a daily basis, whether it's local culture, whether it's international culture, and things like that. Let me get started with the first one. The first principle says that as a language teacher, or when we teach young children in particular, we need to make sure that the students get immersed to very, very rich language. If you're looking for a theory that will support the principle, I would suggest that you look at the input theory by Stephen Krashen. In the old days, it was known as the comprehensible input hypothesis, but today it's known as the optimal input hypothesis. The word optimal means 2 things. Number 1, the quantity of language exposure will have to be there. And number 2, the quality as well. The quality means that the language that the students are exposed to provides a wide range of instances of how language grammatical structures, vocabulary, and things like that are actually used in real context, in real situations. So the input will have to be optimal in terms of quantity and also in terms of quality. Yeah. Now, for your students to want to listen and read to, interest to language input, the listening materials and the reading materials will have to be interesting and also easy. Easy here is defined at their level. And sometimes you may be surprised that the students need to hear the language slightly below their level as well. Slightly above is okay too, but I think most of the time what we need to do is to make sure that our students get a lot of exposure to comprehensible, easy language. And I'll explain to you a bit later why easy language is important. Again, so the key message is we need to provide students with a lot of exposure, daily exposure. How much exposure every day? 15 minutes, maybe 20, or maybe half an hour. Yeah, on a daily basis, every day, every week, every month. And within 1 year, you will be able to see a lot of interesting language development that is happening. Now, the theory behind this is that when we teach language, we want to help our students develop not just explicit knowledge of the language, explicit detailed knowledge about how certain grammatical rules function in the English language, but also in terms of how this language become part of their, linguistic system that allows them to produce language quickly, fluently, and without too much effort. And this is known as implicit knowledge of the language. So one key takeaway of today's session actually is this: when we are working with young children, we want to make sure that we spend a lot more time helping our students develop implicit, intuitive language, intuitive knowledge of the language. Now, here is a nice quote that I often use to support, what I'm saying about the importance of implicit knowledge. Now, the quote comes from a book, an academic book on second language acquisition, and this is what it says very clearly. I'm going to read it to you very slowly. The ability to produce language relatively easily for communicative purposes draws heavily. I think we need to underline that, draws heavily on implicit knowledge of the language. Not so much on their ability to tell you the rules of the grammatical structures in the English language, for example. What is a past tense for? Students may be able to explain to you the past tense is for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 purposes. I think that is not as useful as implicit knowledge, because this is the kind of knowledge that will help the students to actually be able to understand the language, listening and reading, but also be able to produce the language for speaking and writing purposes. Yeah, so the key takeaway is implicit, intuitive knowledge of the language. So, where does rich language come from? Obviously, you are probably, when you are teaching, when you are a teacher, when you are a TEYL teacher, then you are a great source of language input for your students. So my advice is that use English as much as possible. Maybe not 100%, but as much as possible. And make sure, more importantly, that your language is comprehensible, that your language is easy for your children to understand. So you are playing a very, very important job here, especially at the early stage of learning. Yeah, if language is an issue for your students, you might want to use gestures, you might want to use facial expressions, you might want to use props, whatever that you can use to help your students understand what you are thinking, what you are saying in the classroom. The second source of language input is from teaching materials. Traditionally, we use course books, yeah, but the course books may be a little bit limited in terms of quantity. Remember what I said earlier about optimal input. Optimal input has to do with providing students with a lot of language. So course book alone, course book is good, but it's not sufficient. If you are relying solely on course books, I think we'll be doing disservice to our students because they need a lot more exposure to language input. So what you can do is to provide additional materials, usually stories, printed materials, as well as materials from the internet, digital materials like this one, The Ugly Duckling, Curly Hair. And there's a lot out there that are available for your students to access. And your job as a teacher is probably to provide students, websites or other learning resources that provide, hopefully free, stories for your students. The kind of stories that are interesting, kind of stories that are useful, relevant, and easy to understand for your students. At home, now this is an ideal situation. In Singapore, this is what parents are encouraged to do. I don't know about other places, but if you can encourage the parents to also provide additional language input at home, I think that will be a big plus for young children's language development. Just spending like 5 or 10 minutes reading aloud a story or bedtime stories before the kids go to bed, I think that has been shown to be extremely useful in further boosting children's language literacy development. So that's principle number 1. So principle number 1 again says that input is of utmost importance. Without input, nothing can happen. I think I can assure you that. Input is probably the number 1 thing that you need to remember, making sure that your students receive sufficient optimal input on a daily basis. Point number 2 is about engaged learning. I think I mentioned briefly earlier on, teaching and learning are 2 different things. We may be the most exciting person when it comes to teaching in the classroom, but at the end of the day, it is the students who do the learning. And the thinking today is that unless the students are fully engaged, learning is not likely to happen optimally in the language classroom. So essentially no engagement, no learning, or only a small amount of learning. Or if you want to say that there is learning happening, the kind of learning is likely to be very superficial, very light, very superficial, and very fragile as well. The kind of learning that happens, and immediately after, the students will just forget what they have learned from you. So the big question perhaps for us is this. I think you should be asking this question yourself, from time to time, keeping in mind that the students will have to be engaged throughout your lesson. I've read somewhere in the literature that a very good teacher, an effective teacher, is somebody who is able to engage their students, to engage 90% of their students 90% of the time. In other words, there's very little downtime during the learning process. 90. Why 90? Because 90 is good enough. It's not possible for you to engage 100% of your students all the time. So 90% of the time, 90% of your students should be feeling engaged. Now, here is the reason why I am emphasizing the importance of engagement, student engagement during the learning process. I came across this book some years back. The book was written by 2 very senior educators in the US. What happened was they traveled all around the USA. They visited schools after schools, and they observed lessons, hundreds and thousands of lessons, with one big question in mind. And the question they had in mind is this: are students actually engaged in the classroom? Interesting, isn't it? That one big question. This is what they found. Good news. Only a small number of students are off task. So off task means very little learning is happening in the classroom, yeah? Off task means they're not paying attention, they're not listening, they're doing things that they're not supposed to be doing in the classroom. Off task behavior. What about the students who are on task? Good news, 91 of the students are on task. They seem to be learning, they seem to be paying attention. Pay attention to the word I'm using. They seem to be paying attention. But are they actually fully engaged? The answer is no. Only about 6%. of the students are fully engaged. The 91% of the students are able to tell you what they are doing. If they ask you what they are doing when they are on task, they will be able to tell you, hey, I'm doing grammar exercises. Hey, I'm doing this for my teacher. If you go further and ask them, do you know what you are learning? They won't be able to tell you. If you ask them further, do you know what are the success indicators of your learning? They may not be able to tell you so. In other words, they are not very, very engaged. They are on task. They are doing things for the sake of doing things. They are doing things because the teachers asked them to do it, not because they know why, the reason why they are doing it. Very interesting. I thought as an educator, we need to keep asking ourselves this question: are my students fully engaged in the classroom? A quiz for you. Look at the two pictures here. Picture 1 on the left-hand side and picture 2 on the right-hand side. Which of the two classes do you think where the students are more engaged? Picture 1 or picture 2? Very good. Picture 2, yes. Look at the faces of these people. My best guess is that the students on the left-hand side are probably more on task than engaged. Yeah, maybe they're doing exercises, grammar drills or grammar exercises. This one, definitely the students are really, really engaged. Not happening in the classroom. Outside the classroom, they want to spend time, they continue reading, although the curfew time has already been, announced by their parents, they still continue reading, yeah? How do we apply principle number 2, engaged learning in the language classroom, whether you're working with young children or with older children? Look at the picture on the left-hand side. I think the picture tells you that the students will need to be engaged in terms of their emotion. Yeah, the heart there represents the feeling. They have to be emotionally engaged, affectively engaged. The head, look at the picture of the head. I think the students will have to be mentally, cognitively engaged as well. They need to do some thinking. The doing thing is very important. Yeah, the hands represent the doing things. So the students will have to be doing things in the classroom as well. Especially the young kids, they want to jump around, they want to dance, they want to sing, they want to move about in the classroom. So making sure that your students are engaged in that way. And then the big circle represents the social dimension of learning. Yeah, working together, singing together, doing work together with their friends. I think that is part of, social engagement. So that will be the last one. The ability to share their work with their friends, with their peers, or even at home with their siblings and their parents and things like that. So if you want to truly engage your students, you need to think about how you can engage them emotionally. Most important is the feeling. Making sure that the students are there with you, they're happy, they're enjoying the learning that happens. They find the examples that you gave in the classroom being very interesting and things like that. Let me show you some examples. This is the first example. Yeah, a very typical sentences that teachers often use when teaching certain grammatical features in the classroom. The present tense. Examples of the present tense: my mother goes to the market every day. Is that something that is interesting and exciting? Not really. I mean, the kids will be thinking, teacher, why are you telling me things that I know? This is what my mother does every day, and that's very boring. The cat is chased by the dog. Please stay away from cats and dogs. I mean, leave them alone. I think kids are no longer interested in cats and dogs. We went to the zoo yesterday. Boring. Yeah. So maybe you can find something that is more appealing emotionally. Let's try this. This is supposed to be an anecdote. Please laugh at the end, okay? If you don't laugh at the end, then it's going to be a problem. Now here is a conversation. Very interesting sentences, Camila. Robbie, if you have $5 and ask your mom to give you another $5, how many dollars would you have? Very interesting lesson, yeah? How many dollars would you have? This is like a conditional clause, a conditional sentence, yeah? And Robbie says, $5, no more, no less. And the teacher is a bit upset and says, you don't know your maths. And Robbie responds, you don't know my mom. So instances like this will light up, will color, the lesson in a way that the students will find, wow, teacher, this is very interesting. Now here is another example. This is about daddy and the child. How come you fail your grammar test? Past tense, yeah? You failed your grammar test. And David said, sheepishly, absent, Dad. What do you mean absent? You were absent the day before, on the day of the test or before? No, Dad. So what's the problem? It's the girl who sits next to me. She was absent on that day. And that's why I flunked the test. So there's a lot of very interesting examples that you can bring into the classroom. If you are looking for some resources that have been made available by people, try this one, Grammar with Laughter. I think you will enjoy reading and using a lot of very interesting examples from that book. It's called Grammar with Laughter, book 1, book 2, book 3. I hope I have time to write book number 4 and book number 5, Grammar with Laughter. Now here is a task. I think many of you may have seen tasks like this, a task that requires a little bit of thinking, a little bit of problem solving. I think kids will enjoy doing things like this. They are solving problem, they're making use of their thinking, but at the same time, they learn some language functions as well. Yeah, I'm sure you have seen something like this. There's a man here who wants to cross the river, but the boat is very small, and he can only, transport one of the, whether it's the cabbage, the goat, or the fox at any one time, because the boat is very, very small. So the problem is, if he leaves behind the fox and the goat, I think the fox is going to devour the goat. If you leave the cabbage with the goat, what's going to happen? The goat is going to eat the cabbage, and he doesn't want that to happen. So kids can work this out, as they are thinking, working together with their friends. I think they're also learning a lot of language in the process. So some thinking is involved. Learning by doing is a big thing for young children. I think in Singapore, this is what teachers often do. When they teach a certain language features commonly found in text types like instruction or instructional, like a recipe, for example. Yeah, like how to make a sandwich. I think teachers will ask or will actually bring ingredients for making a sandwich, and they will get the kids to actually do it as the teachers are teaching certain language features that are commonly found in this kind of text. Yeah, when you describe a procedure, for example, you need to make sure that there's a very nice and an orderly sequence. Something has to come first before something else. And the use of nouns, countable nouns and uncountable nouns are also can be highlighted in the process. So again, the thinking here is this: engagement is important, and we can do a lot more to engage our students in the classroom during the learning process, linguistically, cognitively, affectively, and also socially and kinesthetically as well, making sure that the students are moving about doing things. If they sit for 10 minutes listening to you, or 15 minutes listening to you, I don't think a lot of learning is likely to happen there. The kids will just get bored listening to you. Next one. This is another big principle where language learning is concerned. The importance of providing meaningful language practice. Meaningful language practice. How we can present grammar and vocabulary in a more meaningful way. The reason is very simple. Our brains have been designed to attend to meaning, not to forms. So unless forms are presented in meaningful language, I think our brains will just not be paying attention to whatever language features that you are presenting to the students. And that brings up another important issue of context. We need to make sure that the context is always there when we present language features like grammar or vocabulary. Now, if you look at the literature on language teaching, you will have seen, maybe tens or even hundreds of different ways of teaching language. But to me, I think there are three main approaches that can help us understand how language is taught, by language teachers in different parts of the world. The first approach is known as the part approach. Now, the part approach actually is an approach to language teaching where language is first broken up into small, tiny units. And then these small, tiny units are presented systematically. And these language units are then explained very carefully and explicitly to our students, 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time. Yeah. Now, I'm sure you remember what the structural approach is all about. I think the structural approach basically is what I would call the part approach to language teaching, because you are concerned about presenting language in a way, in our opinion, in a way that is digestible for the students. So you break it up into small points and then you teach them one at a time in a step-by-step manner. Yeah, that is a part approach to language teaching. The other approach, which is a complete reaction to the first approach, is known as the whole approach, or the whole language approach, if you like. The natural approach that you may have heard before, very popular in the 70s, is basically saying that, well, language is not supposed to be broken up. I think language will have to be presented as whole. A story is a story. Present the whole story. Don't break it up into sentences. Don't break it up into the first paragraph, the second paragraph, the third paragraph, or the grammar points in each of the paragraph. Just present language holistically and allow the students to enjoy the language for a period of time, and voila, they will learn something. They will pick up the language, they will develop their proficiency. So this is the second approach. The third approach is this one. It's known as the whole part whole approach. The whole is presented, the context is there, the meaning is there, the purpose of the text is presented, the audience is there already included in the text, and everything is in there. The whole is presented first, and then somewhere along the line in the middle, as you go through the whole, you may want to highlight 1 or 2, maybe 3 important language features. Very different from the part approach, yeah? In the part approach, the whole is broken up first in the small units, and then the small units are presented one at a time. But in the whole approach, its context is the overriding principle. Understand first, enjoy the language first, make sure that you can relate to the language in meaningful ways. And then somewhere along the line, you may want to teach your students some of the key language features for focused instruction. Maybe the spelling, maybe the pronunciation, maybe certain words that are very important that appear in that particular story. And then you don't stop there, but then you put the parts back into the whole again, so that the students can see again, oh, okay, that's how the whole is created, and that is how parts can contribute to a richer understanding of the whole. This is the approach that Donna Lim, my esteemed colleague, will be sharing with you later on. This is how it is done in the Singapore classroom. Yeah, whole and part and whole. Locally in Singapore is known as Stella, but essentially is a story-based pedagogy, also known as shared book reading, also known as interactive reading, also known as dialogic reading. So through reading, retelling the story, and through interactions with the students, you sort of bring the students to understand the story, but at the same time, somewhere along the line, you might want to highlight some of the important language features to your students. Very different from the part approach. Now, this approach says that, yes, language features are important, but language features will have to be presented in meaningful context, in meaningful language. This is what usually happens in the classroom, the teacher reading together, reading aloud in a very interactive manner with the students. More about this with Donna later on. That kind of reading, that kind of lessons that happen in the classroom is known as supported reading or supported literacy activities in the classroom. Yeah, gradually, after a while, the students will be able to develop independence in reading. So at some point in their primary school education, they will begin to be introduced to books that they can read silently, independently, on their own. So that is the whole literacy program in Singapore, which Dr. Donna Lim is going to explore in her presentation later. Okay, so I've just presented 3 big approaches. You can just show me with a show of hand which approach best describes your teaching or your friend's teaching. 1, 2, or 3. Just show me your fingers. 1, 2, or 3. 1, 2, or 3. Ah, yes, Kamala, 1. Kamala is number 1. Sun Yang is number 3. Good. I hope after today's presentation, you will start exploring the possibility of teaching language in a more meaningful manner, teaching language to young children in a more balanced manner, where language is presented as whole, but at the same time, you play an important role of teaching language features, grammar, vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation to your students in the middle of your lesson. Yeah. This one is very easy, actually. The next principle says that fluency development is extremely important where language acquisition is concerned. Interestingly, the word fluency often refers to speaking fluency. The word fluency often refers to the end, the product of learning. My students are fluent or not fluent. And today, what I want to share with you is that fluency not only refers to speaking fluency and writing fluency, but it refers to reading fluency and listening fluency. The ability to hear words quickly, the ability to read words quickly and with good understanding. I think that is what I mean by fluency. The ability to do things quickly and easily and effortlessly. Now, this one, according to Paul Nation, fluency has for many years been neglected in our teaching. Neglected means teachers mean well, but they always think about, okay, what is next? What is new points, new language points, new learning points that I want to introduce next week? What are new learning language points that I want to introduce to my students the week after? Always thinking about something new. And we forget that language learning requires that the students see the same words, the same spelling, the same pronunciation again and again and again every single day, so that they can do it quickly and effortlessly. In other words, so that they can do it fluently. So it's a serious neglect, according to Paul Nation. He also observes that there's minimal recycling of learned items, minimal recycling. We don't recycle a lot. We are thinking always in terms of what is new next week. What is new next week? Yeah, nothing wrong with that, but I think we also have to be mindful that language learning happens when the students get a chance to do things again and again. I think this picture is telling. The guy on the left-hand side is the trainee, and the guy on the right-hand side is the coach or the teacher. Yeah, look at the guy on the left-hand side. I think he already knows how to do it, but he keeps on hitting the ball again and again and again until he becomes really, really fluent, really, really very good at hitting the ball, not just hitting the ball, but placing the ball at the right place on the other side of the court with a higher degree of speed and with a higher degree of accuracy as well. That to me is fluency, and that is very often missing in our teaching. Yeah, fluency is so important. In other words, I think we know the big words of practice. Practice, practice, practice. Practice makes. Please continue, Donna. Practice makes. Donna, your audio, please.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yes, practice makes perfect. Yes. And that can only happen if we provide students the opportunity to see the same words, the same spelling, the same grammatical features, very frequently. So do a lot of this: frequent listening, frequent reading, frequent writing, frequent speaking. If you're looking for a name for this method of teaching, it's known as the again and again method. Very easy. Again and again. You simply have to do it again and again and again. And I thought teachers are very good at doing things. I overhear a conversation between two, married couple some years back. One is married to a doctor. This is an anecdote. The other one is married to a teacher. What happens if you are married to a doctor? A doctor will tell you, Yitsa, please don't do that. That will make you, that is very unhealthy. That will increase your blood pressure. I think you need to do this. But if you're married to a teacher, and she is married to a teacher, when you do things, Yitsa, yes, and your husband will say, Yitsa, very good, do it again. Do it again. So the again and again method is a very powerful method, yeah. It reinforces the learning that took place the day before or the year before. Finally, people, principle number 5, very straightforward, local culture. Yeah. This refers to ways of speaking, basically, when it comes to language learning. How do we present ideas? How do we greet people? How do we say sorry? And things like that. Greetings, for example. In Singapore or in China, maybe, I think people are used to saying when they meet somebody, it's have you eaten yet? Instead of how are you? Instead of, other usual greetings that are usually associated with the use of English in some countries in the world. Have you eaten well? I was a bit surprised actually when I first visited my dentist some years back, and when I walked into the office, the dentist asked me, "Hey, have you eaten yet?" I was a bit taken aback. Yeah, I've eaten yet. Good dinner. Terms of address. Yes, Mr. is good to know, but at the same time, locally in Singapore, for example, people will call me uncle. And people will call Donna auntie, right, Donna? Uncle, auntie, and other terms of address. Honorifics. In Thailand, I think we have some members of the audience. In Thailand, if you speak to somebody, you have to use either ka or krap. Goodbye, ka, if you're a woman. You have to put ka at the end because ka sounds very polite. If you are a man, then you have to say goodbye, krap. In the Philippines, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to put po at the end. Camilla, correct?
Yes, agree with you.
Yes, please say po. Agree with you, po.
That's strange.
Sounds strange, but that's what you do, right?
Agree po.
Yes, I agree, po. Yes, which is very, widely used in the Philippines context. In Indonesia, if you're addressing somebody like me, you have to put pak at the end. Pak is like a nice term of address, honorifics that you have to use. How about English? In English, maybe hey you instead of hey crap. Hey bro, or hey dude. I'm not sure you want to teach our kids, to say hey you, because that sounds actually a bit rude in some cultures in the region. I think we are also aware now that English is now used as a global language. So I think it's also important for us to introduce some of the cultural conventions of the target language culture, what UK people do, what Australian people do, and things like that, and what they don't do. But we also need to introduce the international culture, the culture of the Japanese people, the culture of people in the Philippines, India, and many other places in the world. I think teaching this cultural values will help our students to really, really become a global citizen. And they will be able to understand what is important, what is seen as, universal values by people from all over the world. The importance of showing respect, for example, the importance of showing honesty, compassion, kindness, and things like that. I think recently there's quite a bit of discussion about the importance of teaching our students the language of peace, or peace education, or peace linguistics, actually, which I think is very important if we don't want to have another war, happening in the near future. We have had enough wars in the past. Ladies and gentlemen, wrapping up, Yitza, the first principle, checking if you have been listening to me. The first principle, Yitza.
Oh, sorry. Rich language.
Very good. You got that right. Number 2, Yitza. Oh, engaged learning.
Engaged learning.
Number 3.
Meaningful practice.
Very good. I think you are excellent. Next one is fluency development.
Fluency development and culture.
And the last one is, yes.
Culture.
Yes. And ladies and gentlemen, there are many other principles that you can explore. What I've just shared with you are just 5 that to me are the most important when you teach young children. Now, here is one question that I have for you to think about. If you were to add one additional principle for teaching English to young learners, what would that be? Yeah, give it a thought. You might want to write it down on the in the chat box, or later you may want to turn on your audio and share, your principle with the rest of the audience today. Think about one additional principle that you think is so important when you're working with young children, learning English as a second or as a foreign language. Thank you very much for listening.
I think it would be
Thank
great
you.
if everyone
Thank you,
unmutes
Willy.
themselves and gives a round of applause for Willy. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. If you have some question or some thought for Pak Willy, we have time before we go to another presentation.
Yes, there's one here from Chu Ting Zheng.
Yes.
Yes, Chu Ting is a graduate student currently studying with me in my university, a bright, brilliant student from China, from Beijing.
Yeah.
No, not from Beijing.
Shanghai.
Beijing, yes, from Shanghai. Yes, Chu Ting, do you have any questions?
Sure. Oh, I just entered. Sorry,
Okay.
I missed the.
Not a problem. Yeah. Yes. I think I saw 2 people raising their hands. It's Ruth. Oh no.
Here.
I think because we can only see one screen, could you put your question in the chat, please?
Or you can say your name and then ask directly if you like to.
Yes, that'd be good too. Yes. Yes, I'm happy to respond to your questions.
I was curious about local culture at the end, respect
Yes.
for local culture.
Yes.
To me, in my context, teaching English in Japan, it's kind of tricky.
Yes.
And my students definitely want to call me Ruthie teacher, which to them is respectful and it's lovely, but it's really unnatural. But to them, that's their local culture.
Okay.
Right. I also had an assistant recently who came, and it was really interesting. She was quite upset about little things like that. She said that's not natural to her, meaning if they had gone abroad to
Yes.
America or Canada, she said they would be laughed at.
Yes.
how are you today? And they would say, I'm happy. Until then, we had encouraged that, but the
Yes.
assistant was, no,
Yes, I'm
you're gonna
happy
get
today. I think that's a
laughed
nice
at."
way of responding to questions like, how are you?
They're very honest, and it's not exactly natural, but
Mm,
could you elaborate a little bit on
yes. Yes, Donna, please share your experience about how teachers address you in the classroom.
Most of them, I think they will still, because our culture, we are still a little bit more traditional, so they'll still
Mm.
call us Dr. So-and-so. But
Okay.
some others, fewer and maybe growing now, will call us by name.
Mm. What about
But
your
our
young?
primary school children,
Yes,
our
primary school children. Yes.
and our secondary, they will still address using Miss or Mrs. So-and-so. Yeah. So we still, we're
Rather
still,
formal. Yeah.
we're still in that culture. Yeah.
Mm. Yes. Yes. Interesting question, Ruth. But increasingly, I think there is a wider acceptance for students to make use of their local cultures to express themselves in the new language that they are learning using their local culture. It may not sound very natural to us because we are not used to, but increasingly as the number of speakers of English in Japan, go up a great deal, I think eventually we'll have to accept that.
that's interesting.
Yes. Yes. When you ask, how are you today? Hey, I'm happy today. I know it sounds a bit weird, but if like 1 million people say that, I think we'll begin to realize that, hey, that's a very nice response, actually. I'm feeling peaceful today. How are you today? I'm feeling peaceful today. Yeah, I know what you mean. When people ask you, how are you today? I mean, that you don't really want to know how they feel. It's just a form of greeting, isn't it? Yeah.
But kids really want to tell you exactly how they feel.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
we like to
Yeah.
let that happen. So
Right. If you ask Yitza, for example, the traditional greeting, which people often use in Indonesia, they don't say, how are you? But they will ask you, where are you going? Right, Yitza? Hey,
Yeah,
mau
something like
kemana?
that.
Yes,
Yes, mau
when you meet somebody on
kemana?
the street, they'll say, hey, where are you going? They're not really interested in finding out where you are going, actually, but that's how they greet each other. Where are you going? Instead of, bagaimana kabarnya? How are you? Very rare, yeah? Occasionally we say, how are you? But most of the time it's, where are you going? You get very upset with people, if people ask you, where are you going, in Indonesia. But if you learn Bahasa Indonesia, I think that's what you need to do.
oh,
But
Yes,
see,
thank you.
what about not language, but customs? Like when I first began teaching in Japan, it really upset me when boys walked into my classroom wearing a hat.
Yes.
That was for hooligans where I grew up.
Mm.
But no matter how hard I explained to them, it meant nothing to them. They were cold. They wanted the hat.
Young children or teenagers?
Oh, it's usually always elementary school.
Oh, really?
Mm,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, but I think this is an interesting point also, because culture can be a barrier to their access to the teaching as well. So I think when Willy was bringing this up, even for stories that we do in our class, the stories that we bring in, sometimes we get them to link up or connect with the stories also because of the cultural values that we share. And that's one of the connect points. Later on, I'll use the story to show that as well. So that story could be in an international culture, for example, and overseas, not a Singaporean way of life, but we're using other universal themes in order to help them connect and therefore help them access the text, which brings it back to that principle of rich language, bringing it back, making it accessible to them.
Yes. Good. Any other thoughts from the audience? There's a lot of audience here, a lot of people here from different places. Been very shy.
Oh, but just an interesting thought. So even with that, so the culture, even for our local schools, we also now do commission some books to be written locally. so that they
Mm.
also can read books that reflect their lifestyle as well. Not all. So there's both like your local culture and international culture
Mm.
books that are also introduced in the classroom. Yeah, because
Mm.
traditionally it was always, we didn't have a lot of local books. So
Mm.
traditionally it was always Western books to the kids. And sometimes for
Mm.
some of them, it's
Yeah.
too foreign.
Mm. Yes, that's why the need for localization. But
Yeah.
Singapore, again, is a very small country and not that many writers. So if you're interested in becoming, writers in Singapore, please come and join us.
Mm.
Okay. No more questions.
Okay, any other
yes.
questions?
I think Donna will exemplify, will demonstrate how, the 5 principles also that I've shared with you are reflected in the actual day-to-day lessons that happen in primary school education in Singapore. Donna has had 10 years of experience teaching young children in school. Unlike me, I've never taught young children. So I pretend to know about teaching young children. I don't actually. Donna is the expert in that area. But right now, she is also teaching teachers, or people who want to become teachers of young learners in my institution. So she has got both, experience of teaching young children and experience of preparing teachers who want to become teachers of young learners. So it's an ideal, mixture of somebody with a lot of very rich experience in teaching. Yitza, back to you.
Okay, so the next one will be from Donna, and as Pak Willy was saying about her experience, and we were talking before about this, which makes it very interesting to know her experience in teaching young learner and how it will convey in the principle that Pak Willy have said. So let's hear it from Donna and let's learn some more then.
Yay, Donna.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to spend it with all of you exploring one of the best topics ever, right? Teaching English to young learners. Okay, I'll jump right in. Okay, so my part will be the Singapore practices that we are bringing out. And yeah, let's see. Okay, so let me just give you a bit of background before we move into it. So in Singapore, our medium of instruction, the main medium of instruction is in English itself. Okay, our primary education is compulsory, and this ranges for kids from 7 years to about 12 years of age. Okay, we're a multi-ethnic society, and right now we are slightly still a bit L2 dominant profile, although that is changing a little. Okay, if I just give you an example, our latest statistics, we have reached 48.3% who indicated that they speak the use of English at home. Okay, this has grown largely since 2010, and to 2020, I think quite a considerable jump in percentage in terms of speaking English at home. Our literacy rate right up to last year continues to remain consistent, 96 to 97%. Okay, and we also have received encouraging results from international assessments from around the world, like PIRLS, PISA, and as well as International Baccalaureate. So this is a bit of the background for Singapore. And in Singapore, we also focus on 6 areas of language learning. This is both in our national curriculum as well as our teaching resources. Okay, so I think you would recognize this being educators or researchers yourselves. We have the receptive skills, the productive skills, and knowledge about language, and we give special attention to grammar and vocabulary. Okay, also because a little bit of our culture too, we have a variation of English, Singlish, okay, which functions on a totally different grammar patterns, etc. Okay, so sometimes we spell it out or make the distinctions for them, and so we do make space for it in the curriculum to teach them specifically grammar and vocab. Okay. So this was what Willy went through with us just now. And this is the one thing I really appreciate about Willy, that he makes all these theories so comprehensive and easily accessible to us. So he really models the principles himself. Okay, so I won't spoil the surprise, but as I go through, right, as I walk you through a typical type of play out of a lesson, you might like to, at the back of your head, just have these 5 things in mind, like, hey, where would you see that happening, that principle playing out in the practices in Singapore? Okay, so we always start off with the receptive skills, right, input, which will eventually then lead to the productive skills. So the mainstay strategy in Singapore, what we do is called, or we have adapted, the shared book approach. So earlier on, Willy was also talking about it. So internationally, it's known by many other names as well. In Singapore, this is slightly adapted to also localize the teaching of this in Singapore context. This is very much taken from the idea of bedtime stories. So if you do a quick comparison here, okay, this one you recognize as your bedtime story, right? And this one you'll recognize it as it happening in the classroom. So this a typical shared book approach set up in the classroom. So the shared book approach is adapted. We are adapted from Holdaway's shared reading. Okay, this is very popular approach for teaching reading, and it's really trying to mimic or replicate the bedtime stories that were being done, because research consistently showed that kids who received bedtime reading or stories at night with their parents, they tended to achieve better, have higher student achievement results academically in schools as compared to their peers. Okay, so those having the bedtime stories tended to do better in schools academically. Okay, so we're trying to replicate that, and part of it, you will see that we had to make modifications to it, right? Because in the bedroom, you can see that they're all close together. You can just use one small book and everybody can look at it. But in the classroom and in Singapore, our younger learners, we have about 30 in a class. Okay, so there's no way we can fit them on a bed and keep them close to us. Okay, so what we try to do instead is we get them to come to the floor, come nearer to us, right? And you will see the teacher also sitting down with a big book, being very much nearer to them, because it's that idea of intimacy that we're trying to capture. Okay, because this makes it for a safe environment for our children, and research shows that when it's a safe environment for them, they tend to also their learning becomes optimal. Okay, so then you will also see that during bedtime stories, the reading parent would use their finger and pointing to the pictures or drawing attention to words, etc., right? Or maybe even gliding under the text. Okay, so in class, using the finger just won't work with 30 kids, right? You can't quite see. So that's where we have the use of the pointer. Okay, the book, of course, I think you will notice the big difference. We have a blown up version, a really huge version of it that we use. And the pointer, then you'll see the teacher using the pointer to glide under the words, right, to mimic the fluency of reading. The easel is used, right, instead of on the lap. Okay, so all these modifications you see, they're all attempts, right, to try to bring in the successful environment or the learning environment at home into the classroom. Okay? So for us, we have also adopted that, and therefore the shared book approach. One more thing I also want to point out, that in shared book approach, we get them to discover the story. Okay, so in discovering the story, we make use a lot of mediating or dialogic talk, right? You will see the parent, okay, in reading and discussing the text or the story, what the parent is actually doing at home, right, is already passing on right? The proficient reader knowledge that the parent knows to the child. So in the same way, when we bring it to the classroom, we are doing that. The teacher is the knowledgeable other, right? The reading expert. What the teacher does is to discuss the text, the pictures, etc., with the students. Okay, and this is where we call it the dialogic talk or mediating talk. Okay, so it's not just reading straight up, but it's also talking about, hey, what are the words? Why is the writer using such a word, etc., etc. Okay, and we of course embrace students' responses to the story. This is also to show them that narratives have multiple pathways, and it's also that in their response to the story, they also contribute to meaning making. They also contribute to the sense of story, and it's the engagement level that we're also going for, because now they become invested in the text that we're doing with them, the narratives. Okay, so we'll make a distinction here between SBA versus story reading. Okay, so for shared book approach, remember, we make use of a lot of mediating dialogic talk, more so than just doing story reading. Okay, so here's what we will try out, if you may. I'm going to use a text to help us, okay? And I'm just going to ask for 5 volunteers, if possible. Can we have 5 volunteers to pretend to be children?
Yes, Yitzhak, number 1.
I'm good at it.
Camilla,
Thank
number
you,
2.
thank you,
Chun Young, number 3.
thank you.
Si Vyong, number 4. And
Thank
Chu
you.
Ting, number 5. There you go.
Thanks
We have
very
5.
much. Thanks, Willy.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I ask you to unmute your mic?
Yes, unmute, please. Microphone on.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So imagine if I bring in this book into the class and I tell the kids that we are going to read this book together. But before you read it, we're going to look at the cover page. Okay, so do I have the children? Are our children ready? The 5 friends?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes,
you so
please say
much.
yes.
So
Yes.
so just respond freely, yeah, as how you think the children would. Okay. Okay, children.
Yes.
It's the story that we're going to read, okay, in a while's time. But before we even read the story, do you think I can get you to share with us what do you see on the cover page?
It's a duck.
Yeah. Well done.
Ooh, I like how excited Kamala is. It is a duck. It does look like it, right? Okay, great. Anything else you notice? Anything else?
Duck is doing
Sweeping.
something. Is
Sorry, Chunya.
the duck is doing? I don't know what's that in the duck's hand. Is
Ah,
Cleaning.
cleaning
okay.
something?
Yes, cleaning something there.
Looks like it's cleaning something. Okay,
Yeah.
possibly, right? And I'm glad you noticed that he's doing something here, right? This picture. We may not really know what it is yet, but no worries. Any other responses?
Why is the duck not in the pond?
That's a good question. Why is the
This
duck
is-
not in the pond? That's
This is
right.
Singapore duck.
Do you
Is
think
it-
so?
Is it
Could it be a
plowing?
Singapore duck?
Farm.
Oh, I heard somebody say something.
Is it plowing?
Fei Ting
Yes,
is
Fei
an
Ching. Yes, Fei
okay.
Ching.
Yeah.
Fei Ting is saying, oh, the duck is plowing. That's a big word, Fei
Yeah.
Ting. Would you want to tell us a little more? You seem to know what this action is.
Because the duck wants to like clean the land and plant something. So that is
Mm.
plowing, right?
Wow.
In the farm.
Okay.
I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, we have a
sorry,
very
you've
we have a
tried it
very
before?
smart child here.
Yeah. Fei Ting seems to understand a little bit about the plowing process, and it's true in some countries, right? They will have to plow the land. So like what Fei Ting is saying, they have to clean up the land and then they have to plant the seeds, etc. Okay, so Fei Ting thinks the duck is doing just that. Okay, that's interesting. Any others? Chu Ting, you wanted to say something with that, Chu Ting?
I see shadow.
Oh, that's right. Well, that's very observant of you. The shadow of the duck, right?
Mm.
Okay, thank you. Shall we read the title to see if we can find out more?
Yes, please.
In the farm. No? A farmer dog.
Farmer duck.
Oh, farmer
I'll
duck.
read it for you. It says, farmer duck. Oh, wow. Just now somebody said farmer, right?
Yes, Beijing.
Beijing. Oh, that's right. Wow, that's very good reading. And yes, we looked at the picture. We could make so many, right? So many responses to this. That's wonderful. So we do know there's a duck, and we do know now that he's a farmer. What do you think then this story is going to be about?
Mm.
He's planting some seed for his
Thank
food.
you, Ija. Ija is saying he's planting something.
Yeah, I think so. He's planning something, I think.
Ah, he's planting something. Okay. Okay. Any other responses? It's going to be about him planting something. Is that right?
Mhm.
Okay. Any other responses?
Putting some fertilizer.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Fertilizer.
Fertilizer. Wow. Well, the children in this class quite good, huh? With this process.
How old
That's
am I?
wonderful.
How old am I?
Only 7 years old.
Oh, 7 years old. Okay.
No, but that's very good. Yes. It's true. Some of us may know even of what fertilizer is, right? So, fertilizer helps the plants to grow even better. Okay. So yes, thank you very much for that. So you think it's going to be a story about the farmer duck using fertilizer? Is it, Kamala?
I'm sorry.
You think the story is going to be farmer duck using the fertilizer? Is that right?
I think so.
Okay. Interesting.
I think it may be a story about a duck wants to plot something, some food on a deserted land because there is nothing on the land. So he wants to grow something to eat, maybe for
That's a
his
very
children.
nice story. Wow. Thank you, Facing. That's a very nice story idea, right? There's nothing everywhere. It looks empty, and now the duck is trying to plant something. Plant something to eat. Good. Nice. You're very good readers this class. Any others? Okay. If not, I'll read to you what's on the cover page. Yeah. Farmer Duck, Martin Waddle, Helen Oxenbury. Right? They're probably the writer and the illustrator of the book. Okay. Thank you very much, children. Okay. I won't prolong your misery, and I will talk a little bit about this. I'll just pause here for a while to talk a little bit about it. Okay, remember earlier on we talked about mediating dialogic talk, right? And I'm sorry, let me get this one instead. Okay, we talked about SBA being very different from story reading. Okay, so the idea of it being shared, right? Shared book approach is to signal to the students, signal to the children that the teacher is not going to read the story. What's the difference? If I were to read the story to the kids, then my way of talking would be a lot different in the classroom. Okay, I will start off with, okay, children, today we're going to read a story called Farmer Duck. And do you see the duck over here? Now, this is a story that we're going to read, and we're going to find out more about him. Okay, so you will see that the teacher is transmitting knowledge of what the text is about. But in shared book reading, the important idea about shared book reading is this idea, discover. Okay, so the role of the teacher is to be the facilitator of this, to help the children to discover. And you'll also see the teacher teaching, right, in a very subtle manner. Okay, things like you'll see the teacher talking about, okay, this, let's read the title to see if we can find out more. So they're very, very quiet and subtle signals to the kid in terms of the title can tell you a little bit more. Okay, the visual, the illustration on the cover page probably captures the essence of the text. Okay, and the title as well. So we can find out a little bit more in the title. Typically for shared book approach, we tend to talk about the visuals first, the illustrations. Why? Because for our young learners, okay, they are using these pictures. Not all of them can read words, right? But they can read pictures. So they're using these pictures to transit into the text. So that's why it's all the more important for them. And how they are doing this is they look at the pictures, they try to work out, make sense of it, and then after that, connect it back to the text. And you'll see that the text is always read by the teacher. Okay, and you'll see as we go along in the text, you'll see it's very broken up. You'll see the teacher reading, and then after that, do you see the duck? Do you see where is the duck, etc. Okay, so that's sort of an idea. We also tell them about the author, the illustrator, for example. So suddenly we're already telling them that a book, we're actually teaching them book conventions, but we never say that. Okay, and we use the big book. Okay, earlier on in that picture, you will see the teacher using the big book put on an easel. So you see it in 3D form, how the teacher turns the page. And the subtle message to the kids again is, oh, okay, when I pick up a book, an English book, okay, I typically read from top to bottom, right to left. But all this is never said. Okay, all this is never said. It's done through what the teacher is modeling to them. And remember the pointer? Okay, so the pointer is always with the teacher when the teacher reads, and the teacher will glide under the word. Okay, the whole point of the pointer, okay, is really to match print to sound. So therefore, you will see the teacher doing something like farmer, duck. Okay, so it's kept very close to the words, and it's helping or giving that the subtlety again, signaling to the students that reading is meant to be very fluent, and it helps them also, okay, with oh, okay, this is the direction of print, left to right, etc. Okay, so essentially that's what we do in the classroom in terms of reading. But let me read you the whole story for you to enjoy, and then later see how we even pull out lessons from there. Okay. Okay, yeah, oh yes, and just one more thing. Okay, so in doing that, the teacher is also harnessing the rich text of the language. So discussing, oh, what do you think? For example, the student was talking about farmer earlier on, right? And then the teacher could be asking, oh, why do you think it's a farmer, etc. Okay, so later on, there might be some interesting use of phrases. The teacher might be asking them, why is this phrase used, etc., etc. Okay, and always multiple responses as well. So you will also see that we don't just stop at one student, although somebody did say farmer already, but we always leave it at yes, possible, okay, and then only when we read, then we confirm the predictions. Okay? So they learn to always go back to the print. Okay, let's enjoy the story. This is Farmer Duck, Martin Waddell and Helen Oxenbury. There once was a duck who had the bad luck to live with a lazy old farmer. The duck did the work. The farmer stayed all day in bed. The duck fetched the cow from the field. How goes the work? Called the farmer. The duck answered, quack. The duck brought the sheep from the hill. How goes the work? Called the farmer. The duck answered, quack. The duck put the hens in their house. How goes the work? Called the farmer. The duck answered, quack. The farmer got fat through staying in bed, and the poor duck got fed up with working all day. How goes the work? Quack. 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 Soon the poor duck grew sleepy and weepy and tired. The hens and the cow and the sheep got very upset. They loved the duck, so they held a meeting under the moon and they made a plan for the morning. Moo, said the cow. Bah, said the sheep. Cluck, said the hens. And that was the plan. It was just before dawn and the farmyard was still. Through the back door and into the house crept the cow and the sheep and the hens. They stole down the hall. They creaked up the stairs. They squeezed under the bed of the farmer and wriggled about. The bed started to rock, and the farmer woke up and he called, how goes the work? And moo, bah, clack. They lifted his bed and he started to shout, and they banged and they bounced the old farmer about and about and about, right out of the bed. And he fled with the cow and the sheep and the hens mooing and baaing and clucking behind him. Down the lane, through the fields, bah, over the hill, cluck, and he never came back. The duck awoke and waddled wearily into the yard, expecting to hear, how goes the work? But nobody spoke. Then the cow and the sheep and the hens came back. Quack? Asked the moo said the cow, baa said the sheep, cluck said the hens, which told the duck the whole story. Then mooing and baaing and clucking and quacking, they all set to work on their farm. Yang. Okay, it's from a duck. Okay, so the later part, I was just reading the story to you, but you would imagine the teacher going through every page like what we did for the cover page. Okay, always the illustrations, always the questions, the talking about it, and then after that, gliding under the words, etc. Okay, so from this, and that's just the reading process, right? The first bit of it, but you'll see that typically we take about 2 to 3 weeks in order to mine the book, okay, for the other areas of language learning. Okay, so the first day is always that input skill. We always do the reading with them first. The teacher is there helping, right, to unpack the story, etc. Okay, but subsequent days you will see that they will do a lot of rereading. Okay, so much so that until the end of the second week or the end of the third week, the children would be able to read the text independently on their own, okay, because of repeated reading, right? And the whole idea of repeated reading, I think we all know also that research shows that repeated reading leads very well to fluency, right? So that's an important element, and that's why the teacher will keep bringing back the book. But we also have another reason for bringing back the book, because it's from there that we provide the context in order to teach and enable application of the other areas of language learning. Okay, so it could be grammar, it could be vocabulary, it could be for speaking, oral communication skills, it could be for writing, etc. Okay, any of the other areas of language. Okay, and finally, we will reinforce these language skills in a more holistic context. Okay, so this one, we break it down in parts already to teach the different, to focus and zoom in on a particular skill, right? And this part, we will bring it back into a holistic context. Okay, let's see what we mean by this. Okay, I think you will recognize this already as the whole part whole, right? We're doing a whole part whole here. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. Okay, so if you see, if I'm going for an adjective, an objective like that, matching the animals to the sounds they make. Okay, I like the students by the end of the lesson, right? They'll be able to match, right? I probably will reread the book and then zoom in probably on this page. Okay, children, let's take a look again. Let's take a look again at this page. Okay, and maybe even reread it with them and ask them, okay, so what's going on here? Do you still remember, etc., etc. Okay, and you would quickly recognize that it holds a lot of potential for teaching the animals and the sounds that they make. Okay, so you will see that from this page, I can pull it out and get them to focus, practice on these animal sounds. So probably to enable the application, I might have a word matching exercise for them. Okay, so from this page itself, I could teach them already. Okay, what sound does a duck make? Yeah, it says quack, right? Yep, and that's how in English we normally say what we normally use the sound for the animal duck. What about the cow? Yeah, the cow says moo. Okay, so these are the sound, children, that the animals make. So after we have done the teaching, and that's in a familiar context because we have already unpacked the reading. We've already done the reading. So after we have done that, we could enable application by getting them to get into their groups and then getting them to match. Okay. So these were found. They can have picture cards and they can play snap with them, for example. Okay, so in their groups, they could play, and I could even do an extension of other animal sounds as well. Okay, but the main bulk of it comes from the book, right? Why? Because this provides a context. This is familiar ground for them. And it is this familiarity that they are learning the vocabulary, the sounds for the animals. Okay. And then at the end of it, at the end of the lesson, we could again present the book to the students and say, okay, let's see how good you are. Okay, we have already learned for the day. Okay, match the animals to make the sounds. Let's see if you can recognize these words and match it back to the sounds to the animals that make them. So you might read the book again, or you just might read that page again, but this time you blank it out. And then the children can, as you go along, the children as we read, okay, the children will fill in the blanks for that. We could even get them to spell, okay, and as they go along, we'll slowly review what they have learned. Okay, so that's one lesson that we can possibly pull out of a book like that. Okay, and then we could also do a grammar lesson. So that one earlier was a little bit of a vocab lesson. So we could also do a grammar lesson based on this book. Okay, and the pages that lend itself well, I think you might recognize it from these two pages, right? Things like down the lane, through the fields, over the hill, etc., etc. Okay, so from this, we'll see again, the start of it, we could reread to help them recollect the story, right? Okay, so they understand. We come straight to the page and ask them, do you still know, can you recall what's happening over here, etc. Okay, and then after that, this time, we will practice on prepositions, right? The down, the through, and over. Okay, children, what does down mean? What is down? Okay, can you all show the actions together with me? How do we go down? Okay, how do we go through something? How do we go over? Okay, so we just focus on these language items and they become the target item for the learning for that day. And then after that, the children could, for example, right, the teacher could get them to, okay, now that we have learned these words, right, we could get the students to recreate the chase using the prepositions learned, right? Okay, and this time they could put it in their school, for example. Okay, what can you do with the steps? Oh, we can go down the steps, for example. Oh, we can go through the basketball court, etc. So in this way, we can even extend it to whole text writing. Okay, so we could set a writing task for them, okay, that they have to write a set of instructions to guide new students, okay, new classmates, new friends from the canteen back to the class, for example. Okay, and in doing this, even before they start writing, okay, we get them to recall the experience. Okay, so do you remember from the book? Okay, do you remember from the previous lesson when we were describing how we were going through the different areas of the school? Okay, and then this one, the teacher will probably start off with a class dictated text together with them. So the class dictated text could probably look something like that. Okay, so from the book earlier on, okay, now we are extending the language cues to get them to generate and use the language items for themselves, right, to generate the text. But this is done at the class dictated level. So typically in Singapore, we also practice the gradual release of responsibility. So we do as a class. Later on, they will do in groups, maybe write instructions to go to another part of the school, for example, and eventually to individual level. Okay, so they will do individual writing, right? So we might hear the teacher during the class dictated text, some possible prompts that the teacher would use with the students.
Donna, in a class dictated writing activity, who does the writing? Is it the teacher or the students?
Thanks for that, Willy. So for the class dictated text, the teacher is the one that will scribe for the children. The children respond and the teacher will scribe, simply because students at this age, they are young learners, and for them to both write and generate ideas become cognitively very heavy for them.
Got it. So it's a bit more like modeling by the teacher, yeah? The
Yeah,
teacher
that's right.
model the writing, but the teacher also invites the students to contribute ideas.
Yes.
But since students may not be able to write on their own yet, it's the teacher who is providing the model. That's an excellent way of teaching writing. Good. Class dictated writing. Yeah, I like that.
Thank you. Thanks, Willy. Thanks for reminding us about the scribing bit. So typically that's what the teacher does. And you will see again, the teacher is teaching, but it doesn't look like he or she is teaching. Okay, so you will see the teacher, oh, what title do you think we can give the text? Oh, why would we want to use that? What should the title do for your readers, children? We need a title that will what does it do? So you get the class to respond that, yeah, the title should tell the reader already what the text is about. Okay, so what would be a good title, children? And sometimes they may not articulate the whole thing so nicely, getting from class 1A to school canteen, right? They can't do that. So you'll see the teacher helping, okay, so where were we going? Right, we're going to the school canteen, okay, and where were we from? That's right, how do we build it into the title, right? How do we say, tell the reader that we're trying to give them instructions from class 1A to school canteen. Oh, use getting, yeah, getting is a good word, children, shall we write that? And then after you see the teacher writing, getting from class 1A to the school canteen. So it's a lot of negotiation with the children. Okay, so again, the teacher is not writing it out straight away for them. It's not teaching them directly like that. Okay, but it's getting them involved in the writing, but the teacher is negotiating at the same time and then helping them to form, generate their thoughts, and then scribe it for them. Okay, so that's the process for them. Okay, so typically the different forms of the lesson might look like that. And if you see, earlier on, Dr. Willy was going through these principles together with us, right? Okay, so I wonder if you're able to see some of the principles being played out in the lesson that I just walked you through. I'll just give you a few minutes to think about it, okay? If you like, you can put it on the chat, and then after that, we'll just take it to the big group and round that up.
Jasmine, are you talking to me or talking to somebody else?
Okay, maybe I'll just do a quick roundup. You probably have some thoughts about it. Okay, so I think from the book itself, you will see that we are very careful in choosing the books that we bring into the classrooms. So most of the books are trade books out there. They are authentic books that are sold outside, okay? And quality children's books that we choose, okay, just to mind the rich language in the text. Okay, because you will see that later on, we are also pulling teaching them the different areas of language learning, pulling it all from this book. Okay, the engaged learning, I think throughout you'll also see that it's the teacher-centeredness is lessened. Okay, a lot of the student-centered practices are brought in. So the children are the one, and that's why it's called shared book approach. Okay, so eventually the children also get the idea that, oh, okay, I can't just sit here and listen to a story. I have to contribute. Okay, shared construction of the text with the teacher. Okay, also in the other activities that they do as well. Okay, for meaningful practice, for example, so we try to get them to again get it from the context of the book, right? So that's that whole part element. And then we learn the different areas of language learning. So we zoom in on these parts, but we don't leave it there. Okay, so we bring it back to the whole again, right? And help them to see that, yeah, it's not learned discretely, the grammar items, right? We're not giving them a list of prepositions and they have to learn it, right? But it's taught entirely in the context of meaningful text, right? Okay, fluency development, a lot of rereading goes on, right? The same text can be visited many times, okay? Every day, almost every day for the 2 to 3 weeks, right? And the children are constantly engaged in reading it again. Okay?
And also, Donna, as the text itself, the story itself provides a lot of instances where sentences, words get repeated again and again. Where goes the duck? Where goes the cow? Where goes the same phrases are repeated? And that's how you learn actually, because you get to hear the same words and expressions again and again. And after listening to this story like 10 times, all the words, all the sentences stay in your head. And that's how children learn. And that's how we learn as well. Yeah.
That's true. Yes, thanks for observing that. Wow, you're very keen observer, Dr.
Yes,
Willy.
very good student, very good child.
Yes, but what Dr. Willy has just said is also one of the criteria for us choosing books for younger kids, right? Repetition and predictability element as well, right? So that it becomes easier for them to ease into the language. This is for young learners, right? So this is also one of the things that we look out for when we select books for younger children as well. I think that repeated language, the structures, etc. And finally, culture. So even for a book, you will see it's so foreign, except that my class earlier on with the 5 students seems so extremely bright and familiar with this culture. In Singapore, our children don't get hardly get to see farms. We are very much a city state, very urbanized. Okay, so for them, this might become quite foreign to them as well. Okay, so on one hand, we introduce international culture to them. We can teach them about farming, etc. We talk in general about it, and how we also link up with our local culture. You probably will see also the teacher discussing with the children later universal values, things like and in our culture, I think we quite prize diligence and we frown on laziness. So you might find that the teacher will be picking up quite a bit on that in the discussion of the text as well, right? So that's the slight balancing we were talking about earlier on. Of course, there are also, this is one of those that has an international culture, but we also have books that are more localized. So those are quicker and easier access for more of our local kids. Thank you so much. That's generally what we cover in our.
Yeah, Donna. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good.
Thank you so much, Donna.
Thank you.
It's back to you. It's
okay. Thank you so much, Donna. I was just reading this comment from Rina here. That she said that from the reading activity, the young learners got English language exposure because they engage themselves in reading activities. The student can practice to use the language that they learn from the book, and it can increase the English fluency in themselves. And learning different animal sounds can raise the students' intercultural awareness. In case of Indonesia, animal sounds are different from what the students learn from the book.
Oh.
So
interesting.
Yeah, the culture reference.
Can I ask what are the sounds, the animal sounds?
Yeah, it's give example.
Oh, like for the sheep, probably meh, not ba.
Oh, okay.
And for the chicken, it's probably quite what patok 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 for a hen, or kukuruyuk for a rooster.
Nice.
I think that is a very nice way of localizing how animals actually sound in different places.
Yeah, and animal in Japan sounds different too.
Yes, I think cock-a-doodle-doo doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
Yes, but that's also one of the ways in which we will localize it for the children. For example, in Indonesia, if let's say we were to give the Indonesian context, so you'll probably hear the teacher, but children, what do we say here? Oh, bad, that's right. And then we introduce that new word to help them link up. So this is the same as when we say in Indonesia bad. Then they've added an extra word based on a familiar context. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Okay, so thank you so much, Donna. Anybody else has a question or a thought about the session?
Okay, Donna, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you yes. Thank you for the interesting talk. From what you just shared is the book shared book approach. I think it's really suitable for the children, young learners. But I have a question about during the sharing, because I think most children are very active when they are faced with so interesting materials. And some of them may sometimes too active, some may a little bit too shy. So how do you, during the sharing part, okay, how do you make sure that some child is not left out? I mean, ensure they're equal or try to make it equal participation during the shared reading process?
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Sometimes they get very excited about the text itself, right? So sometimes for our lower primary, okay, our younger learners, okay, so normally we call them lower primary children, right? Okay? So sometimes the teacher will even make use of like ice cream sticks with their names written on it, right? And then during the lesson, sometimes she'll just pick, or if the teacher knows the class very well, the teacher may also address that question specifically to the child so that there are different responses. And shared book approach is a good place for it because it's there are very little wrong answers, simply because the story can take on so many ways, right? So it's always, okay, that's what you think. Now that's a nice story idea. Now, so and so, what do you think? So then there's that opportunity to open up
you
a lot
would
of
also
responses.
nominate during the sharing, I mean, nominate maybe some quiet child to
Yes.
share
Yes.
their response to
Yes.
the, okay.
Actually, now our classroom has changed quite a little bit. Actually, now it's getting them to withhold because now a lot of the kids want to. Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the things that I try to do with them is also, okay, let's think about it first. Think about it first. So everybody thinks about that picture and they don't jump in first. And then after that, okay, what do you think? So at least there's a little bit of control. Otherwise, they'll all be saying, everybody will be saying, and it can get quite chaotic.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
How about giving each student 3 talking chips? So during the lesson, they can only use 3 of their talking chips. So once all 3 talking chips have been used, then they can't contribute anymore. It's just a thought.
Nice idea.
Just to make sure that everyone has an equal chance to contribute to the discussion.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, Fei Ching raised her hand.
Hello.
Fei Ching is going to be teaching young children very soon in Shanghai.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. And Professor, in the last session, you mentioned about 5 principles, right? So I can understand the first 4 principles, but I cannot understand the last one, culture. Can you just explain it a bit further?
Yes, go ahead, Donna. Culture. Yes.
I think that's for you.
Yeah.
No, that's for you. That's for you, Donna. Yes.
Played out in class, is it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Culture.
I can understand the first 4 principles, but about culture, I suppose I can.
Sorry, I lost you at the end.
I want to know the principle culture more.
Yeah. For the shared book, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the shared book approach, for example, in that, I think just now actually Ishak gave us a very good example. If the words are used differently. Okay, so for example, some of the words, maybe not so much in this book, but sometimes we have a Singlish version of the way it's said, right? And okay, let me see. If, for example, they might understand a term. Okay, I'm just using an example here. Let's say they understand duck to be another word, for example, in okay, that doesn't quite work, right? In terms of culture, okay, so maybe when the words or phrases are used differently in the text versus their own normal language, okay, so this is where we get them to how do we say it, or get them to how do you understand this word, for example. Let's say the word is silent, for example, but then all they know is quiet. And then we can tell them, okay, we always say quiet in class, etc., right? But this one has the same meaning as quiet. So we use the language that they commonly use in the same way cultural practices that they have, and then we you draw that out from them and link it to the text. So just now, I think Ija's example was very nice in terms of in Indonesia, right? When they said that the chicken had a different sound. And so you'll probably see if it happened in Singapore, then it'll be the same thing. In Singapore, we will ask the children, okay, how do we say, and we'll point to the picture for this. How do we say chicken in Singapore, for example? And then they may give some other term, and then we say, yeah, that one is this. So then we are tying in the
How does it sound in Singapore? How does the chicken sound in Singapore? Not cluck? Yeah, in Singapore. Chicken. Cluck? No, not.
Okay, so some might say kokoke or something like that.
Oh, okay.
For example, yeah. Then we will, okay.
Yes, where's Yitzhak? Your example again,
Yes.
Yitzhak. In Indonesia?
In Indonesia, if it's a hen, it's patok, patok, patok. If it's a rooster, kukuruyuk.
Maybe in Vietnam.
Yes. There you go, Vietnam. Yes. Yes. Basically, one idea behind culture is the need for teachers to localize, because some of the terms, some of the language that is used in the original text may not be very easily understood. So that is an opportunity for us actually to explain here. This is how it is said in other countries, and this is how it is said in this country. Like Mr. Farmer, for example, for young children in Singapore, you can tell them that is Uncle Farmer, which is fine. I have no issue with that, Uncle Farmer. And the storyteller is Auntie Donna. Yeah, good question about culture. Yes, I think there's a growing awareness among teachers to not just stick to the original culture from which the story came from. I think we have a lot more flexibility now in terms of how we interpret culture and how we localize culture in a way so that the students can make a much better connection to what is happening in the classroom. I think that is very important for us to be aware of. Yes, Chuting has another question for us.
The questions?
Chuting, no, seriously? You always ask a lot of questions in my class, but not today.
We have some more comments in the chat box. Vida says, I think we can also link the values within the story with our own values according to our traditions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And Leslie from Japan says images can show cultures around the world.
Yes, Leslie is here with us actually. Leslie, please say something about images. Leslie, audio on please, and say something about images and how we can use images to showcase.
Yes, I use
in the world.
There's a few books from the MICE series that I really like to use with my very young learners, and one is Happy Chinese New Year, and we contrast that with Japanese New Year and Chinese New Year, and what things are different and what things are the same.
I like that. Yes.
There's another book in that series where a child is taking it teaches body parts, but the child is taking a bubble bath.
Nice.
I'm very interested in that because in Japan nobody has a bubble bath because the whole family shares the same water. So a bubble bath is kind of an alien concept. So talk about that too.
Yeah,
good.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yes. Here is a quiz for you. In my presentation, if you remember, if you're paying attention, I mentioned one big word. It's called implicit learning, implicit language learning. The idea is that language will have to be acquired largely implicitly for the students to be later able to use the language for spontaneous conversation, for writing, for reading, for comprehension purposes. And how is that implicit thing reflected in Donna's presentation? That is a $1 million question for you. If you know the answer, here's a free ticket to Singapore. One-way ticket. Yes. Anyone? Yes, Rina. Yes, Rina. Please go ahead, Rina. Rina is from OMM.
Yes. Okay. But Willy, I remember that you said about the repetition in Donna's presentation. I think that one of implicit thing that the student can learn I mean, the young learner can learn, and they will use the language when they are speaking with people using that language.
I like that. Yes, yes. The fact that there's a lot of repeated language being used in the story that Donna was telling us earlier on is an example of how students can later remember, because those words get repeated many times. So incidentally, implicitly, they will just use those words when the opportunity arises. So that is how the link, between implicit knowledge and real language use. I attended a session some years back, maybe last year, and I was so interested when the speaker actually talked about two different ways of teaching. One is known as delivery teaching. Delivery means the teacher is responsible for telling, teaching, explaining to the students every single thing that you have in mind. You deliver everything to the students. And what is left for the students? Not much, actually, because everything has been shared by you. But the other type of teaching is known as discovery learning, discovery teaching. And what Donna did early on in the example is an excellent example of how discovery learning can happen and should happen in our lessons for young children, because that's how children learn. If you spend 10 minutes explaining, for example, certain language features in the English language, the present tense, here are 10 rules about the present tense, they will never remember. I mean, they may remember, the rules, that they may not be able to use the language feature for communication. So keep in mind, for young children, or even for older kids, even for us, I think we enjoy a lot more learning English or learning language rather implicitly than explicitly. Some explicit teaching, some explicit learning is okay, but not in the way that I've been doing it. Yeah, the part approach that I mentioned early on, that language items should be presented step by step in a linear fashion, one language item each time, day 1, day 2, day 3, and so on. I think we should stop doing that. It's not going to help. Or maybe it helps a little for examinations, because that is how the exams have been constructed, to check students' knowledge of the language and not to test their ability to actually use the language for anything that is useful in real life.
I think the fact that Donna chooses authentic books to read to the kids, said, right? And when I looked at the book, to me, this was a British book. This wasn't an American book. And there were phrases I wouldn't have learned or knew except through the context. So I think in Japan, a lot of educators would hesitate to use those kind of materials. They would assume that kids have never seen that before, so they won't get it. But they totally will in the context, looking at the pictures. And if you use your voice the right way.
Yes. But I think you're absolutely right with regard to, that's why the illustrations are important. And that's why the books that we introduce for our younger learners, they're picture books. They're not just books. They're always picture books. So, and the pictures are those that will help them to clarify the text.
Yeah, authentic book is an amazing source of real language, of rich language. The only issue we might have when we use authentic books for young children learning English as a foreign language in Japan, for example, or in China, is that some of the words may not be very familiar. Some of the words may be rather high level, not very high frequency words. In which case you could either replace those words if you are using digital text, or during the dialogic lesson, the shared book reading, I think you can just replace those words with words that the students can understand, can readily understand. So the importance of making sure that there are not too many difficult words that the students have to struggle with, that you have to explain in your reading lesson. Otherwise you spend too much time spending time explaining the difficult vocabulary words to your students. So just a thought to remember.
I guess there's a huge difference between the cultures. That English is the language of instruction
Very different,
every
yes.
day in schools. I'm
Very
so
different, yes.
jealous. Yeah.
Yes.
Donna, may I ask you a question about your book choices? So you said some of the books you use are actually written in Singapore.
Yep.
They're locally written books.
Yes.
And then you use obviously like the Farmer Duck books that
Yes.
were written in another country. How do the students react to these different books? Like, obviously part of the culture part is going to be more familiar to them if they're a locally written book compared to, for example, an English book. How do the students react to these sort of cultural differences they find in the picture books?
Yes, there's a lot more. They can identify a lot more with the local books. So we have things like nasi lemak, local rice dish, for example, chicken rice, one of our favorite in Singapore, for example.
Your
We could
favorite
do an
is-
entire book on it. So
Chicken
yes,
rice.
they can relate. They get very excited about it because it's something that they see all the time in Singapore. But at the same time, I think a lot of it depends on the teacher, because our teachers are quite generally, I would say our teachers are quite good in generating that kind of excitement for books. So they don't treat it as this is a Singapore book. This is an overseas book. But to the teacher, it's always, okay, we're going to enjoy a story today. So a lot of the time, the teacher is the one that builds the excitement already for reading, and it's not separating them into which country, etc. But it's always we are reading because we want to enjoy, we want to know more, we want to learn more. That kind of an attitude that they bring it in, and the kids get infected with it. So generally the kids, they quite take to the different stories.
Okay, thank you.
But even among locally produced materials, Donna, there are some that are really, really local. But there are some that is a mixture of local and global and international, values and cultures embedded into the story, right? Singapore being a metropolitan, it's a global city basically, with lots of people from different regions living, working in Singapore. So
Okay, thank you. Okay, by the way, Rina has her hand up, I just noticed. So.
yeah, she's been doing it since yesterday. Rina, go ahead.
All right, I just want to share with the experience in teaching young learners in Indonesia. We also have some book, some Indonesian stories, which is translated into English, and it is told to student or it is read to the student in a class.
Yes.
There is a thing that is interesting. The student got background knowledge about the story, and they learn the language very fast because they have learned the story previously, but they know how to say it in English, how to tell the story in English. Later on, they can easily imitate how the teacher tell the story or how the teacher read the story to others. And I think that one is one book that we can read also in the local story, but it is translated into English. Thank you.
Yes, Donna.
Sorry?
You want to respond to that?
Oh, no. I
okay.
like sharing it too.
Yes, and there's a lot of local stories that have been translated into English, and I would go for it. I mean, it's an excellent resource for language learning. In the old days, language teachers tended to be very conservative. The thinking back then was that if you teach English, you have to also include English-only cultures. That's not the case anymore. Simply because of the number of English language users in the world. The number of English language users in the world, I think the majority are from non-traditional English speaking countries like Japan, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, India, and some other places. And these people need to be able to express, to showcase their own culture as well, in addition to being able to understand other people's culture. So the idea of using materials with a lot of heavy local cultures is a much welcome addition to the English language teaching material. So I would go, for that. Any other thoughts, please?
Going back to the animal noises and the idea of culture, I think there's also a possibility of when there's a huge gap between the teacher's culture and the student's culture, I think there's a possibility of finding a middle way. I remember a few years ago having a group of very stubborn small children, and there was no way they would believe that a cow would say moo, especially the rooster. They just basically accused them of lying. To them, kids have no problem understanding the animal is called this in English, but what an animal says, that's different. They know what an animal says. So we ended up going to the internet and finding YouTube videos of cows and listening to the videos together and deciding together what the cow actually said, which was neither moo nor moo.
That's true.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, we had a blast. And it kind of brought us together. It was a good moment.
Yeah, that's an excellent learning opportunity. I mean, for the students and the teachers as well. Yeah. It's
also interesting to get into the kids' heads when you're teaching
absolutely.
something from your culture that's really hard to grasp.
Yeah.
And there's a fine line for kids between fantasy and reality and truth and lies. So they're like, no, you're telling us something wrong. And from their point of view, I could totally understand.
That's true. So Ruth, in the end, were the kids convinced or did they reconcile with the fact that moo might be another way people read how animals sound?
Not in that particular year. I would say later on, yes. But not in that particular year. They were a kind of a special group of very stubborn kids. The hat issue. The hat was something important to me because I was American, but to them it meant nothing. It means nothing whether you wear your hat inside or outside. So I really felt like the minority culture, and I was like, okay.
But I thought you did really great with like going to the internet and trying to get out the sounds, etc. And I thought it was really nice that it's just that chance to open up their minds. Well, maybe they weren't convinced at that point in time, but I think it was planting a seed in the minds that there are many interpretations to sounds made, etc., etc. That's very good learning for them.
Who really decided what animals say? Leslie. Leslie.
Yes. So I just, what Ruthie, what you were just talking about how the students really didn't believe you. Going back to this, that one, unfortunately it is out of print, but it was the mice series. I think it was Addison Wesleyan, but then Pearson picked it up later. But I have the whole series and I use it a lot with young learners. And one of them was the book called The Food Fair. And in The Food Fair, they talk about, many different foods from around the world. And I think the series was actually based in Hong Kong. So in the last page, it says that we eat rice. And it was an Indian girl. And so we eat rice with our hands, and the kids just went crazy, like rice with your hands, because their idea in Japan is that you always eat rice with chopsticks.
Yes.
And then we had to talk about that. Sometimes you eat, in different cultures you eat rice with your hands. Actually, you eat rice balls, so you do eat rice with your hands. So even though the children's level wasn't so high, we could still have a bit of discussion drawing from their knowledge of their life. And that's something that if I didn't have that story, I couldn't have had that discussion. If I didn't have those illustrations, I couldn't have had that discussion. So even though the child's levels was very low, we were able to have a lesson about culture.
And that's real engagement, even if their level of language is low. And even if there's some frustration on both ends, everyone's engaged. Teacher and students.
Yes. I had a misconception about people from China. I thought everyone also eats rice. They didn't actually. In some part of China, they don't eat rice. They eat noodles.
Yeah. In the northern part of China.
Yes. They don't eat rice. Oh, they can if they want to, but that's not what they do on a daily basis.
Yeah, noodles and dumplings are their main food instead of rice.
Dumpling as well instead of rice.
Yeah.
Yes. Although I keep on telling them rice is nicer, but they don't believe me.
They think dumplings are nicer.
Nicer. Yes. One last comment. Your last opportunity, people. Please turn on your video and audio and post your questions if you have any. Your last chance.
Hello, Dr. Willy. Hello, everyone.
Basir, do I know you, Basir?
Yeah,
you're Basir, right? Do I know you?
Basir from Afghanistan.
Do I know you?
Yes, I was your student long time ago.
I do know you. Yes, of course I know you. Basir was from Afghanistan. Yeah.
It was a great opportunity for me to join, and to learn a lot. It was an excellent experience for me as well.
Yeah.
So there was, a wonderful presentation. So,
by who? By Donna or by me?
By you, by Donna. Yeah.
Okay. Very kind of you.
It was a nice interaction as well.
Yeah.
Basically, so what Donna explained was really fantastic and helped me to think about learning situation in Afghanistan, which is still you're really far away. We still need to think and to find out how we can use that approach in our classes. So it was really helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it was really useful and helpful.
Yes, please come again to Singapore, Basir, if you want to learn more about how language is taught in Singapore primary schools. Basir came to Singapore some years back, I think sponsored by the USAID, right? American, yes, American funding agency. Yeah. Good. It's good to see you again, Basir.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I would like to know how many countries are here. If people would put
yes, please. Yes, camera on, please, very briefly before we end the session. Camera on, please, and audio on, and say hello in your language. Oh, it's the same language. Hello. Ni hao, yes.
Selamat siang.
There you go from Indonesia.
Hello from Cambodia.
Yes, Cambodia. Nice background you have there.
Dari
Indonesia.
Salam from Afghanistan.
Xin chào from Vietnam.
Oh, that's Vietnam. Yes. Vietnam.
Hello.
Yes. Japan, America, Japan, Tokyo, Toronto, everyone.
Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. Oh, we have Anna also. Anna from China as well. Hi, Anna.
Philippines, magandang hapon po.
Yes, magandang hapon to you too from the Philippines.
I'm here in Japan right now. So in Japanese, you're gonna say,
you're in Japan. Okay.
Konnichiwa.
Yes, magandang hapon.
Domo arigatou gozaimasu.
Yes, and maraming salamat po for joining the session.
Walang anuman po, Mr. Willy Renandya.
Yes.
Salamat po.
Salamat. Back to you. Yitza, back to you. Time for a closing speech. Yitza, are you there?
Yitza is having trouble coming back in again, but I'm hoping she will sign back in again in a minute. Her internet connection is unstable.
There you go. Yeah, I think she's back. Yeah, she's back.
Oh. Where is she?
Where is she now? Yitza, are you there?
Yes, I'm very sorry.
Okay.
The connection is a bit unstable here. I keep throwing out. I have to move rooms.
Oh.
Yes, it's
Icha, would you like to close the meeting?
Oh yeah, okay.
So that was really good because
Okay, I'm sorry I missed the last part of the meeting, but it's been very insightful for me, especially, and for all of us, of course. I have questions though, but I will ask Pak Willy later on, probably. Thank you so much, Pak Willy, for being here, and thank you so much for Donna too. Who knows that we learned a lot about culture today that I think we all need for us to be global communication, to be globalized in this world. So I'm hoping with today's event, we learn so much more about how to connect to our young learner and to teach better and hopefully to grow better too. And let's still connect and continue to learn some more. And hopefully we will meet again in another event. And hopefully I have better connection then.
Yes, invite us again.
Yes,
Japan,
thank you so
China,
much.
Thailand, wherever. We'll be very happy to share what we know about the secret of teaching young learners, which we shared with you today.
Thank you so much, Donna. Thanks so much, Pak Willy. Let's give a round of applause for Pak Willy and Donna. Everybody, if you could please unmute yourself and.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Pak.
Saturday is a family time. Make sure you spend time with your family.
It's time for me to have breakfast. It's 7:30 now.
Yes, with your in-laws.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today.
So
Thank
much.
you. Bye-bye.
Come back again to Tokyo Gel. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you again.
See you.
Gabby, thank you. Ruth, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lisa,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.